Hi everybody, how's it going? I don't do many videos on politics because most of what I do does not have a political element to it. However, since I have been doing quite a bit of lobbying lately, there have been certain political comments that show up in the comment section as well as being emailed to me. So I thought I'd respond to some of them. This one having to do with libertarianism. Now, to be clear, before I get into this video, in my comment section, I have been called a libertarian, I have been called a libtard, I have been called a Nazi Republican, I have been called everything there is to be called. And I think it's kind of stupid to have a specific word that you put above your head that labels you. Because what I find very often happening in modern society, whether I'm in New York City, I'm traveling to Nebraska, I'm traveling to Tennessee, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or Washington, or to Maine, is that wherever I go, I meet people that put a name, a label, and then immediately I'm able to tell virtually their opinion on every single issue because they just take that label and they just put check, 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 check next to every single one. I think that makes for a boring person. I think that makes for a boring outlook. And I think that makes for a boring life. I lean certain ways on certain issues, but I don't think that there's one word that could represent what I believe for every issue. And I don't think that that should be the way it is for anybody, including you. I think people should have ideas. I don't think ideas should have people. Today, I got an excellent, well-written email regarding right to repair, the non-aggression principle, and libertarianism, and how the latter two are in direct conflict with the former one. I want to talk a little bit about this, especially as someone who, he said, it seems like I have libertarian leanings, some, which I do. I remember supporting Larry Sharpe for governor about 2.5 years ago when he was running. So I wanted to explain how this works. I want to explain the theory more, and I'd like to respond to this criticism because it's a well thought out one. I've talked about this, but it's been in live streams that are like 1 or 2 years old, and it's an hour and a half in where nobody's going to find it. Now, the non-aggression principle, for those of you who are not familiar, I'd like to explain it using analogy with weed. So in several cities in the United States, smoking marijuana or possessing marijuana is still illegal. So if you make a law that says marijuana is illegal, the non-aggression principle would say that that is an immoral law. The whole concept is that if I'm not hurting anybody else, just sitting in my house, I'm not going out and just smoking my weed that I grew here, and then go to sleep, the next day I wake up and go to work, that to have a law that says marijuana is illegal violates the non-aggression principle. The reason it violates that is that someone could come to my house and try to arrest me. If they come to my house and try to say, arrest me because I'm smoking my weed, and I say I'm not going to go because I don't think that is a proper law, then they will, handcuffs come out, batons come out, guns come out if I resist arrest enough, and then they will aggress towards me in order to take me to prison, and the worst conclusion of that is they wind up shooting me or I wind up dead. That's the concept behind the non-aggression principle. Now, here, they're saying that the non-aggression principle is being violated because if Apple or some other company does not provide a schematic or a board view or a part, then they would be fined. If they don't pay the fine or show up in court or they lose in court and they still refuse to provide it, then perhaps police would get involved. If police get involved and they still don't do what they're supposed to do or respect the court order, then, the eventual end to this where they either aggress against them by seizing money or they aggress against them by arresting individuals that work at the company or something like that at the logical conclusion. And that this would be violating the non-aggression principle. And it indeed would be violating the non-aggression principle. My response to this would be, let's look at all of the violations of the non-aggression principle and put them together and talk about how this would actually work in a libertarian or anarcho-capitalist society. I'm not quite sure if the individual that reached out to me is just a libertarian or if they go full hardcore anarcho-capitalist with it. But either way, I would like to explain this in its entirety. So the idea here is that a law that says smoking marijuana or possessing this amount of marijuana is illegal and can get you put in jail is a violation of the non-aggression principle because somebody could show up at your house with a gun and take you away at some point, aka, police, jail, etc. Here, the same thing is being said with Apple and the schematic. Now, let's take a look at every violation of the non-aggression principle. Let's bring up one regarding 3 years ago that happened to me. 3.5 years ago, I got contacted by Kilpatrick and Townsend, representing Apple, regarding intellectual property / trade secret kind of stuff, where they wanted me to remove a video that I had done because in the video, you could see one page of a schematic where there was a 0 ohm resistor sitting between a power line and the trackpad connector. This allows 3 volts to go to the trackpad and keyboard so that it's able to decode you hitting keyboard keys and the trackpad working. Now, in this example, they contacted me and wanted me to remove the video. I, against the advice of my attorney, said I'm not going to remove it unless you file a DMCA claim, because I want there to be public record of your name being attached to you wanting this video removed so that everybody knows. If my videos go down, I don't want you to have plausible deniability. So I very politely told them to go shove it. Now, they wound up realizing, most likely, this is my guess, this is a PR disaster, we're not going to do it, even though I only had about 50 or 60,000 subscribers at the time. And they didn't do it. But let's say they continued all the way with it, and they did it, and I didn't remove the video. And let's say that it was hosted, by me, not YouTube, where like it was hosted from my house, so I had a say in whether or not it was deleted or not. Like, we're not dealing with YouTube, and I didn't delete it. And then they go to court, and then they get an injunction or whatever against me, and I disobey it. At some point, if I disobey every single court order or court injunction regarding this law that they are trying to have me remove my video based on, somebody could come to my house in a blue costume, as libertarian, as the anarcho-capitalists will say, call policemen, and try to arrest me. And if I resist arrest, violence, the nightstick comes out, the gun comes out, and then I'm carted off to jail. That would be a violation of the non-aggression principle. Because, here's what you have to realize, is that was an element that was called a trade secret, or regarding intellectual property. That's something that I do not acknowledge. Why don't I acknowledge that as a trade secret? Great question. This is a publicly available product. Let's pretend this is a piece of shit MacBook Air and not a ThinkPad for a moment. So this is a publicly available product. This MacBook here, I'm sorry, ThinkPad, I don't mean it. It's just for the purposes of video. You're just a prop, okay? This MacBook here is sold publicly. So I can buy this MacBook, and then I can open it, and then I can measure it out, and then I can draw it out and see that trackpad connector attaches to this resistor, and then that resistor, which is 0 ohms, which I can measure, then attaches to a 3-volt power line. That's not a trade secret, and calling it a trade secret, in my opinion, is a misrepresentation of the law. To me, this would be as if you drew a picture of a rectangle, and then you sold me a brick. And then I told somebody, here, like, draw this brick. And then the person who sold me the brick says, that's my intellectual property. It's like, dude, you sold me the brick. The brick is a rectangle. It's the same thing that I think when someone says, how dare you show the schematic that shows where the words... Dude, you sold me the machine. The machine has a pathway from the trackpad to the resistor. I can measure that resistor so I can see it's 0 ohms, and then I can see that there's 3 volts on the other side. How is this a trade secret? How is this special intellectual property? I'm literally sharing a drawing that is a representation of something that you sell that is available publicly. It's a fundamental misrepresentation of the law, but the company is using that law and the misrepresentation of that law in order to try and get me to remove my content. That entire schematic in general is supposedly protected under intellectual property law. So there are many people that want me to have that schematic. And at over 1 million subscribers, I can tell you at this point, I'm not going to give details because I respect the confidentiality of the people who have shared this with me, who have sent this stuff over to me, whether via secure channels or whether just a little flash drive shows up in my store in a box with no return address from the post office. This stuff often shows up. And I've spoken to some of the people who provided it. These are the people that were involved in drawing up these schematics. They want me to have it. Now, the law that says that sharing that information is illegal is a law, just like right to repair would be a law. In my opinion, as much of a violation of the non-aggression principle as this would be a violation of the non-aggression principle. Because in a truly anarcho-capitalist society, you would not have a state, therefore you would not have this concept of intellectual property legislation that can then be used to violate the non-aggression principle. Because the anarcho-capitalist mindset is that state laws are violations of the non-aggression principle. That violation of the non-aggression principle is taking place when I want to have a schematic. If an employee tries to share with me that schematic, now the gun of the non-aggression principle gets pointed at the employee, because the employee could be fined, could be arrested as a result of sharing trade secrets. He could be hauled to court the same way that the company would be hauled to court if a right to repair bill were passed and they refused to comply with it. Now let's talk about parts. There are certain chips where people have said, "Hey, listen, I think I can make a version of the ISL 9240 or whatever because I found this information that says what address everything speaks to each other on, so we can make a replica." And I'll show this information to people that want to make a replica of that chip, and they'll go, "Okay, so what is this going? A MacBook." And then there's like intellectual property. We're not touching this. Nope. We're not going to make that. Now, the intellectual property and trade secret laws that could be used to punish the individuals that make this chip for me or share details about that chip for me are also state-made intellectual property and trade secret laws. There is an amazing emerging debate that I've read for a long time in the libertarian and also anarcho-capitalist, mostly libertarian community, not anarcho-capitalist community, regarding the validity of intellectual property. The purpose, the intention of intellectual property was so that there was an incentive for people to create works that were not, like something that I build with my hands. So if I create something with my brain, I want to be able to monetize that. And if I can't monetize that, then I won't have an incentive to. That's the purpose of intellectual property legislation. Intellectual property legislation was supposed to incentivize people to want to create things so that they could profit off of them. Intellectual property was not designed for patent trolls. It was not designed so that people could try to sue Newegg over a shopping cart, and it most certainly was not designed with the idea of restricting people's ability to repair or service their own property. Nor was it created, in my opinion, with the idea that it would keep people from being able to share something as basic as a schematic. Because when intellectual property law and all these laws were created, we lived in a society where all this stuff was voluntarily being shared. Now, one may be able to argue that this is a part of contract law, but even if we get rid of intellectual property and everything else, this is a part of contract law between the employer and the employee. Now, the employee himself may get in trouble with regards to a contract if they write into the contract that you may not share this, that, or the other, or this will happen. And this kind of comes back to an area with me of non-compete agreements. So there are things that you can and can't put into a contract. So, for example, in certain parts of the U.S., you can't put into a contract that you can't put a non-compete in there. If you quit or we fire you, you're not able to go to work for someone else to do the same job. And for me, I kind of like the fact that you can't put that into a contract. When that employee is only working here via voluntarism, not because he's forced to due to a non-compete, it forces me to treat him better. So if I want him to stay, it's not about the contract. It's about, am I paying you or compensating you properly for the work that you're doing? And am I giving you a good enough work environment that you choose to stay? So there are secrets within my company that I would prefer not leave my company, even though I make a lot readily available and transparent. However, for the few things that are secret, I don't rely on this sort of contractual written agreement. What I rely on is voluntarism. A, can I properly explain why it is in the best interest of you and the company that these be kept secret? And B, have I treated you in a manner where you believe I'm worth the respect of you listening to me? So there's this one book on the several levels of authority. One of the levels of authority is, it says manager on my name tag, so I'm the manager. Then there's the other, which is where you actually accomplish something. Then there's the other where you show someone else how to accomplish something. And then there's the next level where someone that was previously your student now is able to teach their underlings how to accomplish something. And this is the lowest level of authority. This is the highest. So essentially, do you respect me enough to not only trust my judgment, not only listen to my arguments, which I should have provided you as to why this should be a secret, so that you actually keep it a secret because you believe it is in the best interest of everyone involved and the overall society that it stay a secret. Now, the way I imagine this will work, in an anarcho-capitalist or libertarian society, you're still going to have contracts. You will definitely still have contracts. They're just going to be arbitrated in a different manner than they would otherwise be in a state society. So in a society with a state, you have a court system, police, etc., in order to deal with contracts. In an anarcho-capitalist society, there will be a different way to do it. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means there's a different way to do it. And there are things you can and cannot put in contracts in a state society. There are also things that I think you will and will not be able to put in contracts in an anarcho-capitalist society. There'll be a different way of determining what is fit to go into a contract and what is not fit to go into a contract. An anarcho-capitalist society, to my knowledge, does not mean there are no rules. It simply means no rulers. You're not my president, you're not my king, you're not the boss of me kind of. It doesn't mean that there's no rules. There are rules. It's just they're not done the way they are in a state society. So, for instance, if you were to put into a contract something crazy like when you go home at night, so long as you work here, you will never kiss your wife. That's something that would be ridiculous. That even in a stateless society, I don't think that they're going to allow you to put that into a contract. And I believe that in a stateless society, they're not going to put into a contract. There are millions of devices out there that you will be able to make work again with this piece of knowledge that you have. Do not share it with them under any circumstances. I don't think that that would be enforceable in a contract in a stateless society, nor do I believe that in a stateless society we would have restrictive intellectual property and trade secret laws that would put that person in prison for sharing it with me. Because what you have to think about here is that we are asking Apple for the schematic as a company. Apple says no as a company, but the employees that work there, very much so, are in favor of me having the tools, the schematics, the diagrams, and the parts that do my job. And they are willing, very willing, to voluntarily give me that. Some of the people who are willing to voluntarily give me that are people who are involved in the design and engineering of the product. They're the ones that are actually writing this stuff and putting it to pen and paper. They would like for repair shops like mine to be able to have this. And I've been able to speak to, again, anonymous, not mentioning shit, but at 1 million subscribers, I've had people reach out to me who've been able to prove that they're on that level. They want me to have that stuff. And right now, as it stands, the gun of the government is pointed at them by Apple, because if they share that with me, they will get in trouble with the law. So I urge you to look at the fact that there's not just one gun in the room. There is a gun in the room right now, and it's pointed at me. And what right to repair legislation seeks to do is take that gun and do this. I'm not the one who put a gun in the room. I'm not the one that's been using the gun of the room for a long time. But if it's going to get pointed at me regularly, I am going to have to at some point turn it around and point it at them. This obviously being the figurative gun discussed in the non-aggression principle, not an actual literal firearm, just for the case anybody goes ridiculous with this video. So the thing to consider here is, what do you do? So do I, A, advocate for, because I have slight libertarian leanings, advocate to remove the state entirely, just get rid of the state? B, try and create exemptions within existing intellectual property laws, or lobby to remove existing intellectual property laws? Or C, fight for right to repair? Going for a stateless society, even if you ask hardcore anarcho-capitalists, hardcore libertarians, they will fully admit to you, the smartest amongst them, that that is a multi-generational thing. That is not something that's going to happen in our lifetimes, if it ever does occur at all. I'm not saying that it should occur or that it shouldn't occur, but a stateless society is something that is not going to occur in our lifetimes. That's, 200 years, 400 years, 2,000 years from now maybe, but not in our lifetime. Let's go to B. Removing existing intellectual property and trade secret laws that allow patent trolls to do what they do and anti-repair people to do it, to point the gun at the people who want to help me do my job. That is something that will be virtually impossible to do. You see how difficult it is to get a right to repair law passed when there is virtually full consumer support for it, farm support for it, engineering support for it, politician support for it. You see what it is like to speak to people who, I hate to be mean, but are sponsoring a bill when they barely probably understand how to troubleshoot their own monitor when the VGA cable comes unplugged out of it. You see how difficult it is here. Do you think that I could actually redo intellectual property and trade secret law in its entirety so that I would be able to have companies make me chips that I need, so that I'd be able to have people share schematics with me without fear of going to prison? No. Or C, right to repair. C is the pragmatic choice that makes the most sense for me. And the reason that I don't feel guilty about it is because I am not asking for something for free. I am more than happy to pay for these items that I am already getting for free in some sense, when I supposedly shouldn't be. I am more than willing to pay for it. I'm not asking for a redistribution of resources or money. I'm asking for the ability to pay for something that, whether it's consumers or the people that are making the product, they agree that I should have access to. And that's something that I can live with. And because I realize that in a stateless society, there would be a different way to accomplish what I'm accomplishing. It wouldn't be a law that says that you must release a schematic or else, because a stateless society or an anarcho-capitalist society would not have a state or law or to enforce such laws. It would be a different way. It would be that the person would be able to share that schematic with me because there would not be a gun pointed to their head via intellectual property and trade secret law saying that you can't share that with Lewis. That is how I'm able to support right to repair while also being libertarian on other issues. Because if I were a full ideologue, what I would do, if I were to say, like, I'm libertarian on this, let me be it on everything, is I would just advocate for there to be no state at all. But being pragmatic, that's not going to happen in my lifetime. That's not going to get my customers' data back. That's not going to get me any closer to being able to fix people's problems. And what I want to be able to do is fix people's problems. Voluntarism is a great thing. The fact that there are tens of thousands of people out there that send me messages on a regular basis saying, we'd really like to get you access to this. I'd like to give you access to this. I'd like to talk to you about this, but I'm afraid of getting in trouble. I think it's great. But there are people that are keeping others from being able to volunteer this stuff. And what I really do wonder, I do question how intellectual property would be handled in a libertarian or a fully anarcho-capitalist society. And again, I've been reading, there have been great debates on this matter as to how intellectual property like this or patent trolling would be handled in a stateless society. But one thing I am confident in is that I think in many ways it would be handled different and better than it was now in the interests of more people. Because again, when I see stuff like what I see now with patent trolling, when I see stuff like I see now with, we're going to change this tiny register in a chip just so that hundreds of thousands of people are not able to have this device fixed, it's just, I don't think in a stateless society that would be something that people find is worth protecting. The last thing I forgot to include in this video that I think is worth including is when people say vote with your wallet, don't buy it. That is an excellent point. The problem is that we are at a point where most companies do this. Apple is one of the best examples because they're usually the first to be dicks, and they're usually dicks in the worst possible fashion. However, I'm not going to be able to email Lenovo and get a schematic to the ThinkPad. The only reason the ThinkPad is better in this regard is because if I spill water on it, it doesn't turn into a piece of shit right afterwards. Whereas when I did spill water on it, they still allowed me to have it fixed by them, and they didn't charge me 6 months later. So they're better than Apple in these ways. There are phone companies that make phones that don't break as easily, that are cheaper, that are more friendly to service, which is great. But they're still not going to give me a schematic when I need one, even if I were to become an authorized service center. Apple is one of the best examples for me. The reason I use them as an example is because they're the worst. But that doesn't mean that everybody else is just nilly-willy perfect. The answer to that, again, would be, well then, Lewis, why don't you build your own cell phone, build your own laptop, build your own this, that, and everything else? And that, again, is where the pragmatism comes in, where just because I lean a certain way doesn't mean that I subscribe to that viewpoint on everything. It doesn't mean I have a D or an R or an L above my head that I am just going to subscribe to a full list of beliefs so that you already know everything about me just by one label. Then you would have to do this with almost every industry, because think about it. This is not just an issue with laptops. This is not only an issue with cell phones. This is an issue with tractors. This is an issue with medical equipment. This is an issue in the military. We would have to recreate every single company from scratch. We would have to recreate all of these different fields, all of these different industries from the ground up, from scratch. And that's something that, again, when it comes to pragmatism, what makes more sense? What is more likely to occur with the least amount of wasted resources, with the least amount of wasted time? What is the most likely to occur? That we are going to be able to create new companies to supply the military, new companies to supply every piece of medical equipment from scratch, new companies to supply laptops, cell phones, this, that, and the other? Or that we can just kind of come to a handshake where we stop being dicks. And I tend to believe that the latter is more pragmatic, which is why I can support a libertarian in one aspect, but then simultaneously lobby for a specific regulation in another aspect. It does not make sense for me to unilaterally disarm, Because if I disarm and I stop lobbying for my interests, that does not mean that they're not going to stop lobbying for their interests. They are going to lobby for the power of the state to be used against others if I don't lobby for the power of the state to be utilized in protecting my interests. Just because I stop lobbying to protect my interests, as long as there's a state, that doesn't mean that everybody else is going to stop lobbying in favor of their interests, which is why it doesn't make sense, so long as we do have a state, for me to not lobby in favor of my interests while other people are lobbying in favor of their interests directly against mine, and to use the power of the state, and to use the gun of the non-aggression principle talks about against me. This reminds me of a very contentious figure nowadays named Ayn Rand, who, in spite of railing against taxation being theft, railing against government entitlements and benefits and welfare state, took Social Security payments for over 10 years. And her response to this was, if you see taxes as theft and you were forced to pay into the system, don't see it as welfare, see it as restitution for what you paid in. But in a society where you're not forcefully having money taken from you by taxes, then in her view, it would have been immoral to accept benefits like Social Security. Regardless of what you think of her as a human being, if you think she's great, if you think that she's a scumbag, one thing that is interesting is that many libertarians do look up to Ayn Rand and admire her works, and even she realizes that unilateral disarmament doesn't make sense. Because if I'm forced to deal with the laws of the state, and I am forced to live by the laws of the state, then it doesn't make sense that I allow others to utilize the power of the government to screw me while not lobbying the government to, at the very least, like return it to a neutral state. Because right now, I don't see this as me taking the gun from the non-aggression principle and pointing it at Apple. I see it as them having that gun pointed towards me, them having that gun pointed towards people who wish to help me immorally. And I don't want that gun to be there. I'm not a fan of that gun being there. I would prefer it not be there at all, but if it must be in the room, I'm not going to have it be pointed at me. I am forced to pay taxes to the government. I pay taxes to the government. I am forced to obey the government's laws. So if I'm forced to pay taxes towards the government and I'm forced to obey the government's laws, then I am not going to let other companies pay lobbyists to show up every single day to violate and erode every single right and freedom I have while I just stay home because I'm a libertarian. I am not an ideologue. I am not ideologically possessed. I do not believe that there is one solution to every single problem. One thing that you're going to notice about ideologues is that they have the same answer to everything. Regardless of what the problem is, they always can tell you and somehow trace it back to how their ideology has an answer to how this could have been better, or this could have been fixed, or this could have been... And that's not the way the world works, the way I see it. The way I see it, the world is a very complicated place where I cannot apply one political theory, one particular ideology, or one answer to every single question. Hopefully that explains this, and as always, I hope you learned something.